Thank you for joining Quick Console with Erin Van Kampen and Kristen Lavoie, where we cover different aspects of criminal defense in just a few minutes. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about a program that many of you are already familiar with, but if you are not, you should be. It's MCL 333.7411, otherwise referred to as 7411. It is a statutory deferral program that allows those with first-time drug possession charges to avoid having a conviction on their records. In order to be eligible for 7411, your client must not have any prior drug-related convictions. So while your client may have already had HIDA and completed that successfully, or they had other convictions, they cannot have any drug-related convictions. Then they must either plead guilty or be found guilty of a possession of certain illegal drugs or certain medications without a valid prescription. And that must be to simple possession, not possession with intent to deliver. The judge is going to be the one that ultimately decides whether or not to award your client 7411 status. The prosecutor's consent is not required, but it can be pretty helpful. And sometimes you will see prosecutors make agreements to something like probation with 7411, and most of the time, the judges will agree and go along with that. You can also pursue this with a COPS evaluation, going directly to the judge indicating that your client is eligible for 7411, showing reasons why the court should consider that, and seeking a COBS to see if your judge will give your client 7411 status if eligible. What happens if your client does receive 7411 status? Well, the first thing is that your client is placed on probation, and that probation can also include things like substance abuse treatment or drug court. During that period of probation, the record of the plea is made non-public, and it's very important to make sure that the court has done that. Once your client is placed on 7411, that record in Odyssey or other court case management systems should no longer be available to the public. If your client completes 7411 successfully, the case and the charge is dismissed and the record does remain non-public. This is going to still be accessible to law enforcement and the prosecutor's office, but it should not be accessible to the public during a public records search. If your client does violate probation, and the court has the ability to revoke 7411, they're not required to. Other deferral programs have indications like if the client picks up certain charges, then that status must be taken away. But if the client violates 7411, that is going to be judge's discretion whether or not they revoke the client's 7411 status. Now, let's talk about the impact to our clients and the collateral consequences if 7411 is completed successfully. If your client completes 7411 successfully, it is not considered a conviction for most purposes. That includes things like the habitual offender notice statute and for guidelines. So if your client completes 7411 successfully and you're scoring those prior record variables, you do not assess points for 7411 if completed successfully. Your client also cannot be subject to the habitual offender notice for a successfully completed case with 7411. It is considered only a misdemeanor for purposes of expungement. So when you're looking at the limitations on how many cases and charges the client can expunge, a successfully completed case with 7411 is counted towards the misdemeanor limitations, if there are any. However, having 7411 is not going to protect your client from the collateral consequence that involves immigration consequences. And the reason for that is, again, your client has to either be found guilty or plead guilty to get 7411. It may protect your client from most license sanction issues, but it is, of course, always important to consult an expert on that issue. Thank you for tuning in to this quick counsel. I hope that was helpful in just learning a little bit about the deferral program under 7411. To find CLE eligible training videos, including one that's longer on all alternative sentencing programs and other resources, you can go to www.waynecountydefendertraining.com or scan the QR code on your screen.